One thing about Genshin Impact I think the majority of us can agree on is that it has a very appealing premise to how it approaches combat. In other titles, characters are usually separated into different archetypes like the class trio, fighter, mage, and rogue, which you see in most computer and tabletop RPGs. Then there's the trinity of DPS, tank, and support in team games. Even though the community has a tendency to categorize individual characters into those classes, it's not actually acknowledged by the game and is merely a metagame we impose on ourselves. Genshin's internal class system is instead predicated on the usage of its 7 elements. Technically 6 playable, but that's bound to change very soon. Aside from my character-specific videos you see in Why No One and Why Everyone Plays, I made 2 other discussions on future problems I see with Genshin's character design, as well as one on how I would rework Electro and its interactions if given the opportunity. But in all of my Genshin videos made so far, something that keeps getting brought up is the game's elemental reaction system, where 2 elements are applied to the same target to achieve an additional effect. Elemental reactions encompass almost all of the game's combat for better or worse, and I think I speak for most people when I say I was in love with it at the beginning. Such a basic yet incredibly creative way to add depth to what would otherwise be garden variety action RPG hack and slash gameplay, and it served as a focal point for how characters would be evaluated as the community eventually started to theorycraft. I've been playing Genshin since the first week it came out, but in terms of content creation for this game, I've only been at it for a very short time, only a couple months at that. But during that period, I was approached by a lot of players who spent far more time and dedication on characters than I did. But it wasn't until I did research for Klee's video and what the Klee mains and self-proclaimed experts dug up that made me think, what if elemental reactions are not as well designed as we thought, or at least as I thought? So that brings us to today's video. Are elemental reactions overrated? Do we place too much value on it when judging the viability of characters? Are there situations in which elemental reactions may actually be a bad thing? Let's have a good old-fashioned pros and cons debate about this topic. What say you? Okay, since this is my first video of this type on this channel, let me break down how things are gonna go. For those of you who watch my League videos, this will probably sound very familiar to you, as I've done this a good number of times. But for the rest of you, I usually consider myself a fence sitter. That is to say, I don't like picking sides unless it's the hill I choose to die on. So the way I like to do these types of videos is by listing both the positive and negative aspects of the subject in as unbiased a way as possible, and then I come to a conclusion on which side had more substantial benefits or detriments. To do that, we need to first establish the subject matter. For the uninitiated, elemental reactions in Genshin Impact are triggered by applying certain combinations or permutations of elemental effects on a singular target. Sometimes the order in which the element is applied can cause different effects, but as of version 2.4, that only influences the damage amplification of certain reactions. There's an internal cooldown, also known as the game's tick rate, that prevents reactions from happening limitlessly. Usual tick rates for big games fluctuate between 30 to 60, which means every second the game refreshes 30 to 60 times. Genshin has a separate tick rate called the internal cooldown, which refreshes every third attack or every 2.5 seconds. Trust me, this will be important later. Anyways, you can see all elemental reactions on screen thanks to Sunmilk's very aesthetically pleasing infographic. It says version 1.0, but reactions haven't changed on a basic level since then. As previously established, elemental reactions comprise a huge portion of Genshin's combat and is involved in every part within. But it's becoming apparent that a good number of characters' performances are being held back purely because they don't adhere to the very strict and borderline dogmatic rules set by it. So we're gonna try to figure out whether anything should be done. Arguably the largest benefit of elemental reactions would have to be that it encourages or sometimes forces you to use more than one character. Single-player games are hit or miss about this a lot because at the end of the day, you're allowed to do whatever the hell you want since it's just you. For example, in Pokemon, there's obviously a lot of benefit to constructing a well-rounded team composition of strong and diverse Pokemon equipped with as much type coverage as humanly possible. Or in MMOs, there's the aforementioned tank, healer, and DPS. However, in some cases you'll run into that one player who completes their entire playthrough with just a starter, or that one super tryhard player who tries to solo an entire dungeon or boss raid by themselves. It makes for some rather impressive bragging rights, but it also raises questions about the game's difficulty and balance. While it's still very much possible for you to pull off a floor 12 9-star Spiral Abyss solo, that's under extremely tight circumstances and only by the ultra gamers. The organic way to clear the game's content is by putting 4 characters together with abilities and elements that synergize well. That's because elemental reactions produce a gestalt, an organized whole that is greater than the sum of its individual parts. Instead of 2 incompatible damage dealers, combining the right 2 can lead to explosive numbers that would never have been possible otherwise. Have you seen the amount of damage a single melt, vaporize, or shatter can do? I've seen plenty of Yulas and Hu Taos do like 2 million damage in a single blast like it's a Tuesday morning for them. Even though there's an internal cooldown preventing you from spamming reactions, the potential output from a single well-timed one can dish out far more damage than 10 separate attacks. It makes little practical sense to not utilize elemental reactions because there's also no drawbacks to using them. If there was some kind of recoil factor, then perhaps we would have to reconsider, but as of right now, you're doing yourself a disservice by not playing around reactions. Another benefit reactions bring to the table is their ability to minimize weaknesses and maximize strengths. There are quite a few characters that are kinda weak in a vacuum, but thanks to elemental reactions, they immediately transform into vital staples for any player. In fact, elemental reactions are basically the only reason why support units are valued so highly in this game. Their abilities lean towards applying their respective elements as liberally and effortlessly as possible. Take Xingqiu. The way Raincutter is designed makes it so the active member of his team has constant hydro application succeeding every one of their moves. All of your frozen, vaporize, and electro charge needs are taken care of just like that. Do the swords do a lot of damage and provide decent utility? Yes, but among other things, his amazing utility is mostly due to the ease in which he applies hydro for hydro-based reactions without having to be on the field himself. Otherwise, he wouldn't be nearly as good. Elemental reactions ensure that all characters have at least the fundamental ability to contribute to their team irrespective of what class in air quotes they are, if they're damage, support, what have you. If you really wanted to, you could fit Diluc and Child together and they would be able to work off one another by virtue of Vaporize even if they're both main DPSs. Not just in practical applications but in theoretical ones too. If miHoYo ever decides to go further with reactions, there's so much you can do with this mechanic. At the present moment, reactions only consist of 2 elements being used back to back. What would happen if we could do 3 or 4? And what of the order of elements applied? Could we achieve a new reaction if we combine Pyro, Cryo, and Electro, or Geo, Hydro, and Dendro? Elemental reactions actually remind me a lot about Kekkei Genkai in the Naruto series, individuals born with a unique chakra nature that combines one of the 5 basic natures: fire, water, wind, earth, and lightning. For example, Darui's Gale style combines lightning and water, Hashirama's Wood style is earth and water, but Onoki has a Kekkei Tota particle style which combines earth, wind, and fire. This might just be narrative power creep when it comes to Naruto. I'm sure anyone who watched that show can agree power creep went way too far at the end, but it does make for an interesting idea in Genshin. We have 7 elements to date, but there might be more in the future based on what the community has been theorizing. There could be light, there could be darkness, steel, plasma, what have you. By the way, if you're interested to hear more about that, I suggest you check out Cat with Blue Hat's video. You might be asking me how this constitutes evidence that elemental reactions are good for the game. It's because reactions create more depth to elements beyond their separate properties. To put it another way, Genshin players won't have to worry about combat becoming stale anytime soon. Or will they? Those are the 3 benefits I thought of for elemental reactions, and even if you're of the school of thought that reactions suck, credit where credit is due, it was executed on a basic level pretty competently. You have to give them that much. There may have been other positives I forgot to mention, but we don't have to go too far into the nitpicky. Now, it's time to talk about the possible downsides they might imply. The first and most conspicuous issue we've seen that's creating a divide between Genshin's characters is the question of if they're compatible, not how. Elemental reactions provide such an overwhelming boost of power that anyone whose design is incompatible with optimal usage of it is immediately viewed as inferior to those who are. Now that the current roster is give or take double the size of what it was when it first came out, we have a lot more characters to choose from, and it's not just Diluc for Pyro or Venti for Animal. Granted, some elements are doing better than others, but hey, they're working on it. The problem is, their success is largely dependent on how well they work with elemental reactions. Remember the tick ray concept I talked about at the beginning? Genshin Impact imposes a cooldown on elemental reactions, a speed limit of sorts, preventing you from being able to chain like a dozen reactions in 3 seconds. What this essentially means is that being too fast in Genshin is actually a disadvantage. To demonstrate, let's have a look at Klee versus Hu Tao. Base stats and numbers aside, the reason why Hu Tao is so much stronger than Klee in practical settings is because the former has a powerful single instance burst attack with her ultimate, while Klee focuses on constant damage with hers. Even if there was a way for Klee to chain Vaporize with every single shot, that would not be possible with internal cooldowns. At best, you would have it once every 3 hits. The units you see on screen all have one singular attack that does humongous damage on top of their impressive DPS. That allows players to focus their powerful buffs and combos into one finishing hit, making them much more consistent. In contrast, these units don't have that one-hit kill move, thus limiting their full potential through no fault of their own. Now, just to make a disclaimer, I'm not saying elemental reactions are the be-all end-all. Obviously, their strong placement takes their own personal merits into consideration, but it is an advantage you cannot disregard. In some cases, elemental reactions may be the reason Genshin's balance is all over the place. Since it plays such an important role in combat, it draws attention away from the individual quirks of a character enough to obstruct how strong or weak they really are. In video games, characters should not be solely defined by their attributes or weapon types. That would be an indication of bad mechanical priority. Let's go back to Pokemon for a sec. Typing is important, but at the end of the day, Pokemon aren't valued based on their types, at least not entirely. They're not a good Pokemon for being a specific type, they're a good Pokemon who happens to be that type. Tyranitar is the best case of this. He's a rock and dark type, giving in tons of weaknesses from some of the best types in the game. However, given his incredible durability and the extra special defense he acquires while in Sandstorm, he's still a top tier. No one looks at Tyranitar and thinks he's bad just because of his typing. Genshin Impact does have this kind of prejudice to some extent. People were quick to disregard Shogun as a terrible character upon release, and I'm willing to bet money a large part of that was from her being an Electro character. Despite having the most profitable banner in Genshin's history so far, people already came in with the assumption that she wasn't as good as Venti or Zhongli. Little did we know, she would give rise to the single most dominant version of the national team composition for Spiral Abyss we've seen to date. The funny thing is, Shogun dramatically improves the national team's already spectacular viability, not through her elemental reactions but through her own abilities. I'm aware the main way she improves the team is by making it so the rest of the national members can spec more into offensive stats and less on recharge. However, she doesn't do it explicitly in that way. Just recently, I talked to a few Klee mains and the consensus for the best Klee build was just fire. Lots and lots of fire. They didn't even care about vaporize or melt or any of that, they just wanted to watch the world burn. Makes me wonder if they took Alice's travel guide a little too seriously. That being said, Shogun's invaluable utility still comes in the form of increasing the impact of elemental reactions indirectly, leading us to the final problem. Even though there's incredible diversity in the way we can mix and match characters, that ultimately culminates into achieving a reaction, which diminishes the purpose of character diversity in the first place. This may sound like a direct contradiction to one of the benefits, and I'm doing that intentionally. It depends on the person. On one hand, you can look at this as a comfort that every character is at least capable of achieving the same elemental reactions, so it ensures that no character is completely unusable. That is true to an extent. It can also be seen as impassable boundaries. Everything starts and ends with reactions. Players who enjoy characters that perform with elemental reactions very well see this as a good thing, but that isn't every character in the game. It may not be a problem right now since the number of excluded characters is low, but hypothetically, a year or two from now, it might start to become an issue. Essentially, it's identical to Tony Stark's Palladium arc reactor in Iron Man 2. Elemental reactions are part of what makes Genshin such a fun game, very easy to pick up and rewarding to master, but a more thorough examination of the system should be conducted to ensure it doesn't alienate any characters or units. I know this might come off as unreasonable based on how I described it. To clarify, I'm not saying Genshin needs to abandon all design constraints and play like an FPS, hack-and-slash, platform sandbox game all at once. MiHoYo is well within their right to decide how their game should be played, but if they do, they should reevaluate the game's balance to be all-inclusive and not selectively pick favorites over certain elements or characters. Fortunately, they seem to be aware of this. Ever since Inazuma came out, we've been seeing more units than just Pyro and Cryo over and over because my god, most of version 1 felt like it was just those two elements. If I'm being completely honest, I feel like elemental reactions being a good or bad thing is left up to interpretation. I love the mechanic, I just wish it was a little more consistent for characters who don't embody the generic one-shot DPS archetype. I think there's a lot of characters who look weak simply because they can't do a million damage with Vaporize, Melt, or Shatter. And no, not just Kuching. Then again, I say this time after time, Genshin is a very easy game. There's probably a way to 9-star floor 12 Spiral Abyss using only Aloy, Traveler, Lisa, and Amber. Even if reactions need to be reworked, that's not going to become a problem until like 2023. Besides, the cool thing about theory crafting is we're essentially talking about nothing, my favorite thing to do. But that's going to be it for today. Let me know what you think about the system in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, and consider following my main channel as well if you play League of Legends. Aside from that, feel free to follow me on Twitter, join my Discord server, and check out my other discussion videos after this one. But until next time, thank you all so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.